All right, in 4.2, we talked about photosynthesis as a kind of a broad concept. Here we're going to get into some more detail. So photosynthesis requires a series of chemical reactions. So we talked about that basic reaction and you added that to your notes. But now we're going to talk more in depth about that. So it's going to require a series of chemical reactions. The first stage of photosynthesis captures and transfers energy. So it's capturing that solar energy, the light energy from the sun, this radiant energy, sometimes you might hear it called that too. So it's going to capture this sunlight energy and it's going to transfer that. And it's going to transfer that into the chemical energy that it can use, which would be glucose. So in the light-dependent reactions, those are going to include groups of molecules called photosystems. So this is that light-dependent part that we talked about with the thylakoids. So this is that light-dependent reaction that is happening in the thylakoid area. And remember, those thylakoids are the things that look like quarters, kind of stacked next to each other. And if you had that whole roll of quarters, that would be the grana, right? So light-dependent reactions are going to take place in and across the thylakoid membrane. So photosystem 2 is going to capture and transfer energy. So the chlorophyll, the thing that makes your plants green, that chlorophyll is going to absorb energy from sunlight. It's going to absorb that radiant energy. And that's going to cause these electrons, the electrons that are hanging out around the nucleus of these atoms, right? The electrons are going to get all excited and energized, and they're going to enter into something called the electron transport chain. So these energized electrons are going to enter into this electron transport chain. During the same time, this photosystem 2, you're going to have water molecules that are splitting. And oxygen is going to be released as a waste product. So for plants, oxygen is being released as a waste product. Obviously, that's something we need, but to them, that's a waste product. The hydrogen ions are going to be transported across the thylakoid membrane. So we just said in two steps above here, we're talking up here, water molecules are split. So water obviously is hydrogen and oxygen. So oxygen is released as a waste product, and hydrogen ions are going to be transported across that thylakoid membrane. So that's what's happening here. This is photosystem 2 and electron transport, right? So here we have energy that's absorbed from sunlight, radiant energy, solar energy, say that different ways. That's what's entering into the system, right? Here we have water molecules that are being broken down. So we have water, we have electrons that are splitting off, we have hydrogen that we just said are going to be transported across the chain, and we have oxygen that is being disposed of. It's a waste product. So the hydrogen ions are being transported across the thylakoid membrane, and that's what's happening here. Okay, so these hydrogens are coming across the membrane, the electrons are entering into this electron transport chain, and oxygen is being released. And that's all happening during this photosystem 2 and electron transport. So photosystem 2 is going to capture energy and produce energy-carrying molecules. Let me just pause for a second and say we will go over this more in depth in class. We will read this together in class and make sure that we understand what's happening. I know this can be kind of a confusing process, so just make sure you have the notes so that we can add to the notes in class. All right? All right. So photosystem 1, we just talked about photosystem 2. Photosystem 1 is going to capture energy and produce energy-carrying molecules. So the chlorophyll is going to absorb energy from the sunlight. We know that. Energized electrons are going to be used to make something called NADPH. NADPH. So these energized electrons, they're all excited, they're energized, they're moving around, they're going across that thylakoid membrane, and they're going to be used to make NADPH. That's transferred to the light independent reaction. So up until this point, we were talking about things that were happening inside of the thylakoid membrane. Now we're moving to light independent reaction, sometimes called dark reactions, and this is what's happening in the stroma of the chloroplast. Okay, so again, this is photosystem 1, and what's happening here. Okay, sorry about that. So what is happening here is we have energy absorbed from the sunlight. We know that that's what the chlorophyll is there for, to absorb that energy. So energy is going to be absorbed from the sunlight. Okay, so I'm sorry if there's some kind of weird gap that happened right there, but the bell rang and I didn't want it to be difficult to hear. Okay, so what's happening here is we have energy that's going to be absorbed from the sunlight, so that's that radiant energy, and it's entering into the system. We have the NADPH, which is going to be produced when those excited electrons are added to another molecule called NADP. And it's always going to be shown with a plus sign here too, because it's a slightly positive molecule. And if you think about that, that makes sense because we have these electrons that are excited, they're moving through the electron transport chain, and they're going to come across something that's polar, it's positive. While this is negatively charged, clearly that's going to attract one another, and that's going to form this NADPH. Then we have hydrogen ions that are going to diffuse through the protein channel. So these are those hydrogen ions that were broken up when that water was broken apart. So these hydrogen ions are going to diffuse through the protein channel. So this is like when we built those cell membranes and we used the straws to be a channel for things to come through. So this is going to be a channel through which this hydrogen is able to move, right? We're going to have ADP being changed into ATP. So we have that adenosine diphosphate, and it's going to be changed into adenosine triphosphate. So we're adding that phosphate group back to the molecule. And that's going to happen when these hydrogen ions when they flow through the ATP synthase. Right, so light dependent, so this is happening in the stroma, reactions are going to produce this ATP. So hydrogen ions are flowing through a channel in the thylakoid membrane. So those thylakoids, again, are those things that look like quarters stacked next to each other. And the hydrogen ions are going to flow through those channels in the membranes, and they're going to produce this ATP. And ATP synthase is attached to the channel that makes ATP. So anytime you see synthase, something is being made. So ATP synthase is going to make ATP. So these are just some various microscope pictures of the ATP. Right, so the second stage of photosynthesis is going to use energy from the first stage in order to make sugars. And sugars for the plant is the ultimate outcome here because that's going to be its food source. So light independent, this is the part that's happening in the stroma. Reactions are going to occur in the stroma, and they're going to use carbon dioxide molecules. Right, so these are light independent reactions. They're taking place in this fluid here that's called the stroma. It looks like fog in this picture, but it's fluid. Right. A molecule of glucose is formed as it stores some of the energy captured from the sunlight. Carbon dioxide molecules are going to enter into something called the Calvin cycle. Energy is added and carbon molecules are going to be rearranged. Right? So this energy, the energy that's coming from this originally from the sun, is added into this whole process, and carbon molecules are going to be rearranged. A high energy 3-carbon molecule is going to leave the cycle. Okay. So that's what's happening here, right? This is showing us the whole cycle of where things are moving. Okay, so if you start here at the 12 o'clock position, you have 3 carbons. And those 3 carbons are going to interact with 3 more carbons to produce a 6th carbon. Then it obviously is a 3-carbon again. You have this reaction with the ADP and the ATP that we talked about. We wind up with a 5-carbon. One more enters into the cycle. You get a 6-carbon. Again, you use up a phosphate, use some of this energy from ATP. You wind up with ADP. You also have that NADPH that we talked about. And it's going to then become NADP. This will become more clear as we move forward. I'm actually going to stop this video here. We will pick this up in the next one because, quite frankly, I'm running out of time on the free screencast here. So you'll see that we pick up the second part of 4.3 right on this slide.